Doberman is an operator I definitely have a special place for in my heart. She is probably one of the most important operators for a new player's experience. She is very interesting from a game design perspective, but before we get into that, we should probably go into what it is that she does. Doberman is a 4-star instructor who buffs up your 3 stars, and with her module, your 3 stars buff up her. Her talent is simple, giving all of your 3 stars 11% more attack. This may not seem that insane, but in Arknights, small passive effects can make a big deal. Cora's talent, buffing her defense by 18%, is a boost of over 140 defense, which makes a big deal in Arknights. For your 3 stars, there's loads of good targets that Doberman can hit. For example, let's look at Plume, a good damage dealer for the early game. Sadly, she gets quite overshadowed by Vigna, but regardless, she can still hold her own. Plume has 516 base attack, and a talent that boosts that by 8%. Doberman's talent, like all stat buffs, only affects the base attack, so it won't take into account the 8% boost from Plume's talent. 11% of 516 is 56, so Plume gains a total of 56 attack with the Doberman just existing on the field. To put this in perspective, Plume gains about 2 attack every single level, so a boost of 56 attack is approximate to 28 free levels of attack. So in a sense, just by putting Doberman on the field, Plume goes from Elite 1 level 55 to Elite 2 level 28. What about some other standout 3 stars? Cruz goes from 446 attack to 495, which is a boost of about 23 levels. Midnight goes from 569 to 632, which is a boost of about 27 levels. Ansel goes from 427 to 474, which is a boost of about 24 levels. Steward goes from 576 to 635, which is a boost of almost 29 levels. And Melantha goes from 894 to 985, which is a boost of about 32.5 levels. So by Elite 2ing one 4-star, you essentially get some Elite 2 tier attack values out of all of your 3 stars, who are already dirt cheap to upgrade. Doberman is just supreme value. But what if you can't really bring a bunch of 3 stars into a stage? What value will Doberman have then? Well, the thing is, she's still great. With her module, Doberman gets a second talent. A long time ago, I originally was disappointed that her first talent doesn't get a further boost with her module, but I've become more apt at the game, the more I've come to appreciate Doberman's second talent. Doberman's second talent gives her 15 attack speed as long as you have a single 3-star on the field, which frankly isn't a difficult requirement. You can throw Ansel in as a general core medic and have him perform perfectly fine. Doberman is an instructor, which means she already has a pretty fast attack speed to boot at a 1.05 second attack interval. Plugging this and the 15 attack speed boost into the formula on screen, which I explained in my Artsfighter video, gives you a final attack interval of 0.91 seconds. So if we assume Doberman is always hitting a ranged shot, getting her a 20% attack boost from her trait, Doberman goes from 734 DPS to 847 DPS, which is a bit over a 15% DPS increase. So just by having a pretty decent operator already on the field, you get a boost to Doberman, which frankly isn't that bad. But that's not where her story ends. Doberman is a general DPS melee tile operator works wonders. Since Doberman is an instructor, her defense sets pretty high among guards at 385. Compared to Irene, the offensive 4-star lord, Doberman's defense sits quite a bit higher than Irene, with only her HP being slightly beaten out by him. This isn't even mentioning that Doberman is also dirt cheap to deploy at only 13 DP. Only instructor that comes close is Swire, but unlike Swire, Doberman does a shit ton of damage. Doberman's S1 is a power strike skill, which most people will roll their eyes at, thinking it's nothing more than a cringe generic skill. But in reality, this is without a doubt Doberman's most cracked skill. At level 7, it has 4 offensive charge and crits for double damage. At Mastery 3, the skill has only 3 offensive charge and crits for 230% damage. Now when it comes to crit skills, going down just a single charge immensely increases DPS, and Doberman already deals pretty good damage without it because of her trait effect. When Doberman crits at Mastery 3, she deals 1479 damage. When Doberman crits at range at Mastery 3, she deals 1775 damage. With Doberman's S1 equipped, Doberman has an average range DPS of 1120, while her second talent is active. This goes down to 993 while she's blocking her target. Since a good chunk of Doberman's DPS comes from a giant burst of critical damage, Doberman is still capable of retaining some of her DPS while against higher defense targets. Against a heavy defender, Doberman gets damage thresholded on her first 3 attacks, but retains nearly 1000 damage on her crit, letting her keep a 293 average range DPS. When it comes to Doberman's offensive merit, her S1 is absolutely bonkers for really consistent high damage. Her S2 on the other hand is the opposite. Rather than outputting high consistent damage, it heavily boosts Doberman's talent. The skill itself only boosts Doberman's attack by 80% at Mastery 3 and has a 26% uptime. Since her S1 has a 25% uptime with a 130% attack boost, yeah, her S1 is better for damage output. If you're using her for her S2, then you're using it for the 3-star buff. At Mastery 3, it triples Dobermann's attack boost talent, increasing the 3-star attack boost to 33%. So if we go back to the part of the video where I said that Dobermann effectively increased the level of your 3 stars beyond Elite 2 by about 25 levels, you may now triple that increase. Cruz has 446 attack, boosted to 495 with Dobermann's talent. With her S2 uptime, Cruz is boosted to 593 attack. Doing the math, that's 69 levels worth of attack increase. So just by putting down your Dobermann and clicking a button, your Cruz goes from Elite 2 level 1 to Elite 2 level 70. Which, you know, sounds pretty good, all things considered. Maybe it's a good thing 3 stars don't have an Elite 2, or else they'd be the new meta when combined with Dobermann. Keep in mind though, Dobermann's S2 doesn't have the best uptime, and its cycle is even worse at a whopping 95 seconds. It has a good starting charge of 40, meaning you'll be able to activate it quite soon into the fight, and then you're most likely one time later on. Its main function is to be used as an anthem, beefing up all of your main 3-star damage dealers for an insane surge of burst damage. Although it sounds impressive to say that Dobermann is beefing up your 3 stars by almost 70 levels, it isn't exactly a fair comparison. This only applies to offensive or medical operators. Sadly, Beagle, Cardigan, Midnight, and Melantha won't get survivability boosts, meaning for them, they will still be playing on the Elite 2 level 1 playing field, at least defensively. It is important to note though that Cruz is Dobermann's #1 target. Cruz's crits are already insane as they are, and since Cruz fires twice with her skill crit, the damage boost is basically doubled, and since her crits, like Midnight and Steward, will take full advantage of her new attack boost, Cruz can absolutely shred with nearly 600 attack. If her talent crits on top of her skill crit, Cruz could reach 1,321 damage in one bolt, which is kinda good for a 3-star combined with a 4-star, especially since that skill crit also included another bolt doing 830 damage, for a total of like 2,159 damage from Cruz. Sadly though, most of this information won't apply to your average player. Why bother boosting a Cruz when May is capable of doing that kind of instance damage on her own? Being able to upgrade your operators and the existence of modules can make these synergies seem pretty pointless. But of course, that doesn't make Dobermann obsolete. She is still very powerful with her S1, especially when you throw a useful 3-star on your team, and honestly, that's just how Dobermann was designed, to be the perfect learning curve operator. Now it's time for a new segment of these operator analysis videos that I like to call Why Dobermann Should Be a Welfare Operator. Most obviously, it makes little sense that Dobermann of all operators isn't given out for free, especially since she not only plays an important role in the first chapter of the story, but she's the one teaching you how to play the game. Dobermann is the one teaching you the basics of Arknights in a direct sense, being your guide through the game's tutorials. It would make perfect sense if you were to unlock her after beating 3-4, since that's the first stage after the final basic tutorial. After that point, Dobermann still teaches you how to play the game, but in a less direct way. She encourages 3-star usage, and it's 3 stars that are your window into understanding the unspoken basics of Arknights. In order to discuss this further, I need to discuss the idea of a baseline operator. A baseline operator is a sort of tutorial unit into a specific subclass. Their kit is meant to teach the player how a certain subclass is meant to be used, and what they can expect other operators of that subclass to perform like. Baseline operators are usually the lowest rarity a subclass can appear at, with higher rarities being more creative with how they take the subclass. For example, Noir Corn is the baseline protector. He teaches the player what a protector's main role is. High block, high defense, high HP, but non-existent range and attack. Noir's Corn role is simply to defend. He helps introduce you to more complex iterations of the protector subclass. Beagle and Cardigan both teach 2 different routes of what a protector is capable of: HP-based survivability and defense-based survivability. Rangers teaches you about the marksman's anti-air attack, Yato teaches you about playing the early game, Durin teaches you about arts damage, and 12F teaches you about splash damage. Beyond the 2 stars is the 3 stars, probably the most important set of operators for a new player's experience. Although the 2 stars do have good stats for their low level cap does disincentivize usage for new players. 3 stars instead are dirt cheap to upgrade and can go all the way to max without any chips or complex farming materials, since their Elite 1 upgrade is just 10k LMD and nothing else. At most, a 3-star would require a single tier 3 mat for getting their skill to level 7. Most players will write off 3 stars as just gacha fodder, as that's what they are in every other gacha game. In Arknights, they are what you are expected to learn the basics of the game with. Among the 3-star pool, you have a set of branching operators for returning subclasses and a set of new baseline operators for a new subclass, with some exceptions. The main point of the 3 stars is to do nothing but either introduce you to a new subclass with the new set of baseline operators, or to introduce a greater branching path with the subclasses that you've seen before. Melantha is the baseline operator for Dreadnoughts. She lacks anything that would make her stand out against other Dreadnoughts, but that's the point. Melantha's simplicity makes it easier for a new player to intrinsically get it. The Dreadnought subclass identity does just simply boil down to having good HP-based survivability, good damage, and only one block. All of this information is taught in Melantha. She doesn't need a more complex kit because that doesn't teach a new player what a Dreadnought is supposed to do. The simpler they are, the easier it is to understand. Which operator do you think a new player who knows little to anything about Arknights will learn more from? Neural the Radiant Knight or Melantha? This is also a big reason as to why I'm not a big fan of introducing newer players to the meta, especially since they're not in a game state that needs to worry about it. An operator like Neural jumps directly into the deep end, forcing a player to learn 3 completely different and complex skills on top of 2 talents, one of which requires a bit of Casimir synergies, while the other one gives the incorrect idea of how operators should be designed. At that point, the idea of a Dreadnought is lost on them. The concept instead transformed into a focus on complex individual operators, rather than a set of subclasses that each possess operators that accentuate certain elements of that subclass. It is simply less difficult to learn and understand each one of the 3 stars compared to the higher rarity operators. Once these operators are understood, it makes it much easier to understand higher rarity operators of the same subclass. If you have gotten the hang of both Beagle and Cardigan, then adapting to Kahora and Matterhorn is much easier. Kahora is a slightly more complex Beagle, and Matterhorn is just a slightly more complex Cardigan. And so when Bubble is added to the conversation, being a protector whose defense and HP sit in the middle of Kahora and Matterhorn, her unique supportive capabilities end up standing out. Kahora and Matterhorn are your payoffs for learning Beagle and Cardigan, with Bubble being that next step in your understanding of the subclass. The higher rarity a subclass is restricted to, the more complicated a subclass may be for a newer player. Phalanx casters don't have a 4-star because they're not really meant to be introduced to the player until they have a better understanding of Arknights, because frankly, Phalanx casters aren't easy to use, same with Fortresses, Liberators, and Duelists. Subclasses with a higher skill floor are locked behind a higher rarity. They are meant to be harder to get, that is the point. When you do eventually get them, you should be hopefully at a point in the game where this new subclass introduction is appropriate. Ignore the fact that you can get your hands on really weird operators really quickly with the special Operations Record Restore. Another big reason why 3 stars is so simple is because it allows you as a player to focus on understanding the rules of the game, how the game works, and what skills you need to learn within that rule set. Things such as DP management, deployment order, or counterplay. If the operators themselves are intuitive and easy to understand, then gameplay with them mainly comes at utilizing that simplicity to its fullest. So what does any of this have to do with Dobermann? Well, as I said earlier, Dobermann has 2 main functions. She buffs up your 3 stars and acts as a really good damage dealer. In the early game, her main appeal comes from that boost to your 3 stars, because in the early game you are expected to and encouraged to use your 3 stars, not because they're the best thing ever, but because those 3 stars are what help you understand the basics of the game. If Dobermann was given out to everyone from beating the first set of tutorials, then players would be further encouraged to use their 3 stars, since now they have a reason to. Besides them being really easy to obtain, level up, promote, obtain potentials on, and generally being stronger than some higher rarity counterparts at Elite 1. Once the early stages of the game have been completed and the new player has probably graduated from using 3 stars into using 4, 5, and maybe 6 stars, Dobermann still has usage. 3 stars don't immediately become obsolete once you get later in the game. You may have better options, but those 3 stars don't fall off as most people like to say they do. And so, when you are at the point where getting Dobermann's module is accessible, Dobermann no longer encourages you to rely on your 3 stars, but instead to rely on her. Put what you have learned to the test, choose a 3 star, and use it alongside Dobermann, and your reward is a hefty DPS boost. Dobermann is, in every sense, an instructor. Her first talent is literally called Starter Instructor. She doesn't just instruct 3 stars, she instructs you. She's there to teach you with a bunch of tutorials, and at the same time, she's also there to teach you in a meta sense. Dobermann encourages players to engage with Arknight's natural learning curve. It sucks that she's restricted behind gacha, because loads of people will miss out on this because of it. And the nature of Arknights being a gacha game, loads of people will just simply assume such a learning curve doesn't exist, and the existence of 3 stars is simply just chaff for making 6 stars harder to get. I love Dobermann not just because she is a fun operator, I love her because she represents something wholesome about Arknights. Arknights isn't your typical gacha game. It isn't a game that exists purely to appeal to the down bad players with too much disposable income. Arknights is an actual game, and Dobermann exists to teach players about that game and to be with them through the entire journey. I would never tell anyone to not upgrade an operator, but if they are just starting out, I feel their very first Elite 2 should be no one other than Dobermann. Your 3 stars are important as a new player, and I would hate for you to neglect them as much as so many have done before. Take your time. Arknights isn't going anywhere. Understanding your 3 stars helps you understand so much more about Arknights. Yeah, it'll suck not being able to breeze through stages like other people can, but the point of the game isn't to win, it's to learn and evolve as a player. You may not be speeding through the game now, but in the future it will all be worth it. Doberman is a disciplinary instructor. It makes sense, doesn't it? Doberman is heavy on discipline. There are many strict rules under her training regimen, and no transgression or violation is tolerated, which has put off many players. At the same time, Doberman cares about each player's diet, physical condition, and emotional state. She has never forced anyone to do more than what they are capable of doing. It is just that her commitment is a bit too subtle. Naturally, this stems from Doberman's inability to properly express herself. Hopefully, more people will come to understand her. Doberman is your instructor, and in no way does she wish for you to fail. All players are capable of performing well, it is just difficult to do so. There is no pride to be lost in failure, there is only pride to be gained in success. Your 3 stars will set you up for failure time and time again. They are not the strongest operators in the game, but being in an environment where you can fail is what helps you learn and adapt as a player. The reason why actual Niche Knights players seem to be so cracked isn't because they're good and do Niche Knights to test themselves, they get good because they do Niche Knights. Limitation breeds creativity. It forces you to understand each and every micro interaction, figure out what you need for success. Doberman is a gateway into that. She will teach you how to play Arknights, then test your ability to do so. Your 3 stars will not carry you through high-risk CC or absurdly difficult IS ascensions. What they will do, though, is make you a better player.
オペレーターを編成する際は適材適所を心がけ、各々が最大限に力を発揮できるようにしてやらなければならない。オペレーター個人の能力も大事だが、それ以上にドクターの判断力が試される。